Hello again. I'm going to talk about the National Health Service today, and I realised that by convention I should only do so with a special look on my face, kind of compassionate look, as though I were discussing sacred matters, and that I should also say something about how marvellous the NHS is and how wonderful all the people are who work for it. The NHS is, after all, practically an object of idolatry in Britain, the one institution which nobody dares to criticise. I want to think this morning about one aspect of the National Health Service, and that is the popular idea that it is sustained by, and could not manage without, large number of immigrants from the Third World. This belief is almost an article of faith, and one never hears anybody question it. Starting with the nurses from the Caribbean in the 1950s, the accepted narrative is that the NHS is wholly reliant upon immigrants, and that this alone is sufficient reason not to put a stop to immigration from Africa and Asia. It is a lie. The reason that I call this a lie is very simple and perfectly obvious to many ordinary people, although they do not voice their opinions out loud for fear of being accused of racism. The truth is that although there are indeed many immigrants and foreigners working as nurses, doctors and support staff in hospitals, they are spending much of their time looking after and treating other foreigners and immigrants and their families. In other words, one of the reasons that we need the number of NHS staff that we have is because of immigration. I mentioned the other day a visit to a London hospital where almost everybody in the urgent treatment department was foreign, as were most of the staff. This is fairly typical these days. Foreigners working for the National Health Service treating other foreigners. This is only the tip, though, of a very big iceberg. Let us take the case of the sort of thing which very few of us ever think about, which is autosomal recessive conditions, not a phrase which trips off the tongue easily, and hardly the sort of thing that most people will have had occasion to think about. It simply means genetic defects caused when two people with copies of a defective gene have a baby together. Sometimes this leads to disabilities, lifelong disabilities. On other occasions it can lead either to a stillbirth where the baby is born dead, or high infant mortality where the baby dies before his or her first birthday. Caring for babies born like that, who have very little chance of surviving, but are tended by nursing staff in special units, a bit like intensive care units for babies, for months on end until they do die, takes up huge resources in the NHS. The financial costs are staggering because there's very high staffing levels, of course. Here's a little known fact, and I give a link to the research which uncovered it in the description to this video. Babies born in Britain to mothers of Pakistani origin are 38 times as likely to be born dead or to die before their first birthday as are those born to white English mothers. Yes, you did hear that right. 38 times as many babies of Pakistani heritage as those of white British origin. In some parts of the country, especially in the Midlands and the north of England, units devoted to nursing babies who will almost certainly die before their first birthday contain no white children at all. Here is a prime example of the way that one set of immigrants create a huge need for NHS resources and causes the National Health Service to be desperate for more staff. In those baby units, the majority of the staff are often black or of Asian heritage. The high infant mortality rates among the Pakistani community are of course caused by cousin marriages, which account for over half of all marriages in that community. Genetic defects at birth are accordingly far more common. This means that 2 or 3 times as many children from that community are profoundly deaf or have complex multiple disabilities. All this will be dealt with by the NHS, of course, in due course, and requires extra staff. To look at another instance where immigrant communities create a high need for services, we need look only at Caribbeans in the United Kingdom, who are 9 times as likely as white English people to develop schizophrenia. This is a genetic thing too. I gave a reference to the research in the video which I put on this channel yesterday about the case of the Caribbean paranoid schizophrenic who went on a stabbing spree last year. Psychiatric units are crammed with black people. Africans are 6 times as likely as white English people to suffer from a psychosis. The secure units are especially likely to have a large number of black people in them. Like the intensive care units for babies, these NHS units need very high staffing levels. Again, most of the staff are also drawn from immigrant communities. I could go on in this vein all day, looking at various disorders ranging from sickle cell anemia, which only affects black people in Britain, to thalassemia, which affects only people from South Asia living in Britain. But I think viewers are getting the point. Black people and those of South Asian heritage use a greatly disproportionate amount of resources provided by the National Health Service. If they didn't, the pressure on the NHS would at once be alleviated, and so they would not need to bring in so many staff from other parts of the world. Much of the work now undertaken by the NHS consists of people whose origins are in Africa or Asia treating other people whose origins are in the same part of the world. This then is the prized myth which progressive and left-wing types invariably trot out when the subject of immigration is raised. I suspect that, like the rest of us, they know really that it is nonsense to suggest that we need all those foreigners working for the National Health Service. They are recruited abroad and brought into Britain largely to treat health problems suffered by members of immigrant communities. It is a vicious circle, and as long as there is large-scale immigration, then the NHS will be employing ever greater numbers of foreigners to treat immigrants and their families. I realise some people might find this offensive, but I can't think of a simpler and more accurate way to describe the situation.